Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Spirit. Spirit is our interfaith happy hour conversation where we talk, we have a guest spiritual advisor and we talk about faith and spiritual things for LGBTQI persons. So you grab your drink. Today I'm drinking my iced tea from Ron's Hamburger Place. Down on 15th in Denver. And so you grab your beverage of choice and we're going to talk about spirit. I want to take this opportunity to say hello to our spiritual advisor tonight, which is Reverend Kelli Driscoll Cruz, or did I get it backwards?
You got it. No,
I got it right. Okay. And I've known Kelli for several years. How long have you been in the Tulsa area?
I'm moving into my 10th year.
Yeah. So they were very young when they came here, and I was too. and so I look a lot different, and she is finally moving into her adulthood, and she's doing a marvelous job and looks amazing and is a powerful voice in the city of Tulsa, especially when it comes to some of the things that we really hold special. So Spirit is a weekly conversation that we have here at the Equality Center. And it's a program that helps individuals to really discuss faith and sexuality. And we help people either recover from spiritual abuse, or perhaps they are in the place they want to renounce faith because of their negative experiences, or they don't believe, or connect people with other people who may be spiritual minded individuals. But the goal is to help individuals and groups explore faith and sexuality. We do this every single week. And so here are our key precepts, and this is our program mission for Spirit. We are committed to interfaith dialogue. We affirm the full equality for LGBTQ persons and families, and we resist any coercive action of proselytizing and conversion. And we believe in the eradication of conversion therapy and the dangerous reparative counseling practices that we find so prevalent today in faith communities. So let's talk to our guest, and I want her to tell me a little bit about herself here at the top of the program. So if you have a question for Kelli, for our spiritual advisor tonight, you can drop that, you can post that on Facebook, and Ko, who is behind the curtain, so ignore the person behind the curtain. This is the great and powerful Oz. I know I look a lot like that big head from Wizard of Oz, but there's somebody behind the curtain, that's Ko. And if you post a question in Facebook, specifically live for Kelli, Ko will give that question and he'll drop that in our Zoom. So if you have questions, Kelli's certainly willing to answer those. So Kelli, I want you to tell me a little bit about you and first of all, your official role and your professional career, and a little bit about you and your family, because I know all of us, in whatever we do, sometimes people think our profession is really all there is to us, and some people think our career is really the only thing that's important to us. But all of us have a whole part of our personalities and lives, and we want you to share. We would just want to dish with Kelli and hear everything you have to share with us tonight.
Well, Toby, I don't know if anybody heard my daughter coming in here. She had just, she prefers our restroom. I'm in our bedroom for some reason. She prefers our restroom. So she was in and out. She is 6.5. Her name is Charlie. She's named after my dad. And she and my husband, Nick, and also my cousin, who moved here right at the beginning of the pandemic, live out near the botanical gardens. We built a little house out here and have a few acres and love it. Neither of us grew up with anything but like city, neighborhood, suburban kind of experience. So everything is a new adventure for us and for her. And so it's a lot of fun to be out here and just see the variety of creation. We have a creek on our outside the fenced area that we're still getting all the ins and outs of it and figuring it out. And our neighbor who owns basically all the property around us has hiking trails and stuff on his property. So it's just lovely. And we've been out here probably almost 3 years, 2.5 years. And we've been here in Tulsa 9.5. And I came here to work as the pastor of Bethany Christian Church in Tulsa. It is at 6730 South Sheridan. I am now the pastor emerita of that congregation, and they shifted into a model that had no staff. So they're completely lay-led community. And we made that transition officially to end on my 40th birthday, September 30th. And I've been trying to take seriously that was an opportunity to flesh out the rest of me as a present for another decade. And thankfully, we're able for me to take that time to do that work. So I love the people of that community. And it's a weird thing to not be leading worship every Sunday, but it's also a gift to have a little bit of a different experience. I'm originally from Shreveport, Louisiana, and lived in Fort Worth when I went to TCU and Bright Divinity School, the seminary that is there. And then I lived in Kansas City for 5 years, and that's where I met my husband, and he grew up here. So that was our initial interest in looking at where else we would be, where other churches that I would not have to compromise my values, which include the full inclusion of everyone, and not just the like everyone is welcome on the sign, but an intentional statement that says that the LGBTQIA community is welcome. And that I found at Bethany. They had already done the work to say that they were an open and affirming congregation, which is what we call it. So did I cover it?
No, that was really good. So so the model that you're following allows you a certain liberty, especially you mentioned where you don't feel like you have to lead ministry worship every Sunday. But at the same time, it allows that congregation to continue to survive and do its work. And where exactly is Bethany located? Kind of, because our viewers are from all over the region. And
sure.
I just wanted to...
Yeah, so if you know where Woodland Hills Mall is, it's a mile west of there as the crow flies. So, you know, it'll take a little bit longer to get there if you're on the street, but it's in that area of town. Okay.
And you're on Sheridan, right?
Yes, Sheridan.
So kind of the 71st and Sheridan, between 61st and 71st?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that they are an official welcoming, reconciling congregation and had been for several years.
Yeah, they they're probably coming up on 20 years. They were the first Christian Church Disciples of Christ congregation in Oklahoma to become open and affirming. And I cannot recall off the top of my head what year that happened, but it's been at least 15 because it was before I was around and had been established. And since then, thankfully, there are other Christian Church Disciples of Christ congregations that are also open and affirming. And we have this long name because basically there are different groups that wanted to use specific names because they believed that better explained who they were in a part of the Christian community. And I love the intentionality, especially over the past 5 to 10 years among the LGBTQIA community, of the growing ways in which we can talk about identity and sexual identity. And there's no doubt that like the founders of the denomination 200 plus years ago, we're not looking for the kind of nuance that we desire these days, but they did end up over time having this long name in a search to basically find a label that explains something, but most of the time it just leaves people confused.
And so you said you went to seminary. Where was it you went to seminary again?
Bright Divinity School at Texas Christian University. So I have an undergraduate degree in the historical critical approach to religion. So I studied world religions with a heavy emphasis on Christian things, but I'd say half of my efforts were in other religions, half of the studies. And then I walked down a hallway to another building, like a breezeway, and went to seminary there.
So did you feel called to the ministry, or did you seek it as a career? And were there any impediments being for female clergies? Did you experience any kind of barriers to there, or was that already well developed as you proceeded into ministry?
I feel like most people might nod their head at this, where things can be labeled one thing, and then you find the hidden meanness and the hidden misogyny and the hidden isms just under the surface once you are up close and personal with human beings. And so I grew up in a congregation that had never had women ministers, but it was a very moderate theological community in Louisiana. They don't really reflect that moderate stance anymore, and that makes me sad. But I grew up in a place where you could ask 1,000 questions in Sunday school and still be loved and celebrated, and that's how I ended up entering into ministry, because all my questions were embraced and celebrated. And I'm sure the adults turned around and rolled their eyes at me a million times, but I didn't have another place. My home life was not a place where all my questions and curiosities were met with that kind of welcome. And so that church in particular, and some of the adults that were there, really ended up me being on the journey towards ministry. I had the church camp nerd reality, like my first kiss was at church camp, and felt a call to ministry, and had a group of people in there that supported me along the way and gave me really good, hopeful examples of what it could mean to be a minister. And in a weird way, like I never really had any other trajectories from about 15. Like that was kind of, here are the things I will do. And so I'm blessed and kind of weirded out by it now, because I look back and thinking about what I want for my daughter, I'm like, I want her to try everything. And I'm thankful for the ways in which I was able to have a place. But I kind of wish I would have played a little bit more too.
And where was it? So you went into ministry, and you said you came from a more progressive congregation. where did you begin to notice or hear of accounts of where LGBTQ plus persons maybe had negative experiences with faith or faith communities or religion? And in your formative professional training in seminary or your personal development as a clergy person, when did you begin to form your ideas about your commitment to full equality and the inclusion of LGBTQ persons into church life?
I think the first space where I started to wonder about how horrible Christians can be, and then what the possibilities are for really welcoming people, was in high school. There was a student who was kind of bounced around in different schools and ended up at the one I was attending. And he never really truly was out. I mean, this is like 1996. But I watched the way that people really tortured him. And these are people who I knew spent Wednesday night, Sunday morning, and Sunday night at church. And I couldn't make sense of that. It was super, like, in that space, I knew what they were doing was wrong, that whether or not there was an explanation for sexuality, we don't treat people that way if you're saying you're Christian. And then when I went to college, I was given permission by the environment itself to see what that looks like, because there was a church I attended for a little while that was completely, like, their mission was reaching out to the community and creating a holy place wherever people were on the sexuality spectrum and gender identity. And it was a beautiful thing to see. So thankfully, in those late teens, early 20s, I was able to see up close examples of that. At the same time, I was working in churches where that was not something that would happen, that kind of open celebration. Sometimes would be like, just don't talk about it, kind of like the military, and then people would be involved. But that's not enough. So that's not affirming, that's not celebrating. And so along the way, I had these little snippets of experiences where people were truly welcomed and celebrated.
In your professional training, did y'all look at the problem passages in the Bible and in Greek and Hebrew and study some of those things? And did you, in your professional academic career, preparing you for ministry, did they discuss the diversity of interpretations, or?
Oh yeah. So the religion department at Texas Christian University is significantly progressive. Especially like at late 90s, early 2000s, what I saw there was a willingness to embrace people as people and understand religious texts. And this goes back to my world religions studies. Any religious text, not just somebody else's, but mine as well, is the product of a group of people who were trying to make sense of the world. And I know from my own life that every way that I've made sense of the world isn't true or accurate. And so we were given very clear parameters to use ungendered language for God, and to struggle and find where the welcome is in the stories and to dismiss the trope-like interpretations of those passages that are used to hurt people. So yeah, I mean, professionally, it was just like, yeah, this is what we do. You don't like people could check out. They could decide they weren't going to major in religion or be a student at Bright Divinity School. But that was the only way you were going to check out. And it wasn't only on issues of sexism and heterosexism, but also racism. So in those majors, in those narrow areas.
So you were trying to do that, and then you came to Bethany in Tulsa because you felt like that was a good match, that it was a congregation that aligned with your values. Have you ever in your professional ministry, serving in the role of a chaplain person or a pastor or minister, not real sure what y'all call your religious leaders, but as a spiritual advisor, have you ever encountered individuals who really resisted your interpretation and really wanted to debate it with you, debate it religiously, the topics, and want to challenge your particular views? And has it showed up in like families and ministries, like maybe funerals or weddings, or have you experienced religious fundamentalism that can be exclusionary and homophobic and transphobic? Have you experienced that in your ministry work?
Yes. I would say that most contexts for engaging that are ones that are in the public sphere. In congregational life at Bethany, I didn't engage that kind of aggressive point of view about the fundamentalist interpretations of scripture. Sometimes there would be people who didn't quite know what they were coming to, what kind of congregation, what kind of value sets that we held. And so, they might leave halfway through the surface or whatever. But if people would engage me in a public way around their norms of scripture, that really is the baseline for me, is just to start there. And if someone can't agree with me that scripture is product of a group of people struggling to make sense of their life and their relationship with God, meaning that they want to take every word literally, and they want to believe that at some point there were scribes, whether we call them Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and among the Hebrew Bible prophets, whatever, if they want to say that somebody just wrote it down word for word from what the holy told them, like, we're not going to get anywhere about arguing about those passages, because we have a fundamental difference in how we understand scripture, and frankly, how we understand the identity and character of God. So I usually would just shut it down. Like, I'm not going to engage you on this, or in terms of funerals, when there have been family members or friends, that family kind of folks that are around some circles, that wanted to say things like, well, he's just his roommate or whatever. I'd be like, no, this is the community that your beloved was a part of. And I'm not going to make a scene about this, but I'm not going to refer to A, B, or C as boyfriend or like as roommate. Like, if boyfriend is the truth, then that's what we're going to say. And it only really got ugly a couple times in 9 years of ministry at Bethany. So, and then I just keep moving. Then there'd be the street preachers that might come in and need to share a word. And I just say, okay, I hope you have a good day. But I reached a point where my job, my calling was not to change minds in that way, but to receive people who had been harmed by church and embrace them in a way that helped them see their beauty and their worth and their value first to themselves and then in the light of God's love. And not like if they were looking for ways to disrupt family members that were beating them over the head, then we could have a different conversation. I don't know if I'm totally clear about this, but
No, you're doing an excellent job. So, I mean, it's a reality, because I think, one of the questions is, what does it mean for a congregation to be welcoming? And what does welcomed look like? And I mean, no faith community, everybody's homogenous, or I mean, as much as we'd like to stamp out, clone everybody so that everybody believes and their experience is the same, that's not the reality. And so even when a church is welcoming, you're going to have individuals who are going to maybe love the church until you start addressing the inclusion of LGBTQ people, and then they are out of there.
Yeah. Well, frankly, we had a few of those at Bethany when we first came. I don't really mind talking to people about how I went to the Eagle that weekend with some other church members. And so apparently that was a little too far for some folks. And we had some people go out the door. And that was hard at first, because I read the situation wrong. I didn't realize that we were open and affirming. I don't have to say, I don't want to harm the folks who truly believed that they were clear about being open and affirming. But there were people within the community who understood the community from a very limited perspective. So I don't know if they watched Will and Grace, or like what, like, I don't know where their influence came from, but they only understood the gay community as kind of this caricature. And once we started embracing people that were outside of that kind of box.
Yeah, the sanitized, that in all appearances were heteronormative. They yeah.
Right.
They didn't hold hands, and they didn't kiss at church, and they,
Right. It was any time there's loss, there's something to process. And what I realized is not any of us are always going to be truly welcoming and truly affirming. And I don't mean that with the idea of affirming the LGBTQIA community. I mean, as individuals, we will get it wrong sometimes, and our stuff will end up being on top of somebody else, because we're having a bad day, or we haven't done our emotional work, and we have to take ownership of that, and we really have to take ownership of that when it comes to marginalized communities, because the individuals that live in those marginalized communities are already carrying a weight that for people like me who are cisgender, straight, middle class, like check the boxes kind of, there's a lot that people are carrying that we simply don't, that I don't initially think of. And I'm hopeful that if we are intentionally practicing ways of welcoming and getting to know the variety of people in God's immense creation, that we will do more good than harm. But I think there's a lot of critique of the Christian community that says it doesn't do more good than harm, and we have to listen to those words really, really intentionally.
So, this is Facebook Live, and so we have people who are following us, and if you'll look in the chat, I think.
Oh, I can open that up.
Yeah, I think somebody feels like you need, they want to share a verse with you, and I thought perhaps you might want to respond to that if you felt like you'd like to. So.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. So I think first off, we need to deal with Paul's letter to the church at Corinth. The first letter begins with his beautiful welcome of always, lovey-dovey kind of salutations. And then he says to them, I thank God I baptized none of you, except maybe Crispus, and he has these handful of people. And then he goes forward to diminish and rage out, frankly, at the church at Corinth, at all the ways that they are not being faithful to what it means to live in right relationship with one another, to live in community. The rich people were bringing the communion supplies, eating until they were gorged, and then sharing the crumbs. This is what was happening in that community. Corinth was a highly diverse place. There was a lot of activity there. People traded there. And so there were a lot of different activities and understandings. So we see idolaters, fornicators, adulterers, homosexuals, sodomites. Do I need to read the question, or I'm guessing everybody can see this?
Well, yeah, they posted it.
Yeah.
So I thought.
So anyway, I don't know what the intent of this is, but of the question. I do know that the individual list of sins could, in one way or another, we would find all of us in that list. The drunk mommy wine moments of the drunkards who are having a hard time making it through the pandemic. Thieves, Americans have plundered the world in different ways, more than once. Are we all thieves? So in setting the context of what Paul is writing to the church at Corinth and understanding the kind of community and the deep need for the community to actually say that they're doing something and then do it, to be a community that calls on Jesus, who asks, and in Jesus's way, live in love and care and make sure that no one is left behind and no one is staring at the ritual feast wondering when they're going to eat. That breadth of understanding, we have to put these words into context of what was happening. So I guess that's my response is, you can take two verses outside the context in a translation, by the way, that is not one of the most accurate, the New King James Version, and use it to harm people. Or we can remember that when Jesus met along the way people who he intentionally knew or understood what their issues were, miraculously understood, he met them with grace and love. Unless they were the ones who were out to judge others and decide for themselves who could be inside the love of God and who was outside. So that's my response.
All right. Thank you, Kelli. That was, that certainly is a part of what we're doing tonight, is to respond to the different interpretations that you find within religion. And this is why people get hurt by it. I mean, a part of this, you would identify as, how do you identify? I mean, are you a part of the community, the LGBTQ community, or are you an ally? I mean, what is your?
I am an ally. I don't particularly engage, like go around saying I'm straight, you know, like, I believe that there's a rainbow of options. One of my, if you're around me long enough, you'll hear me say God is immeasurably creative. And so, you know, if my life had been different, maybe there would have been someone else that wasn't a man that I met and love and wanted to live my life with. And so because my life is a cisgender heteronormative framework, when I'm filling out the census, I think it's appropriate for me to call myself an ally.
And why do you feel like it's important to identify as an ally for the LGBTQ community?
Well, the work towards justice and inclusion is holy work. And that work is not only the responsibility of those who are within the community, but anyone who values what it means to welcome and what it means to be really clear about who we are. One of the things I struggle about, kind of being a 21st century American, and what I've studied in religion and history, is that we are folks who want to kind of put a label on something and then be done. We're not individuals, or excuse me, we're not a society that wants to get into the nuance of what it means to be who we are. You know, like you're this kind of fan or you're this kind of fan. Like, I don't even know the rules to most sports. So, but I do notice that people take significant offense, like real deep offense, when someone insults a sports team. And that tells me that maybe we've over-identified with something and have work to do internally to remember who we are, or even discover who we are. And so I guess it's two strains of thought I'm bumbling through is, one, justice and inclusion are values that I believe are worth fighting for. And two, I think that the LGBTQIA community at large has so much to teach the world about what it means to be your true self. Because when you happen to fit into whatever the society says is normal, you end up not having to do the work of really getting to know yourself and discovering yourself and what it means to be wonderfully made. And the thing that I've learned the most in being an ally is that it's not just people who are different that need to do that work. It's everyone. And the gift of the community is that we can see people who are immensely brave, overwhelmingly loving, supporting one another along that journey. And it's incredible. It's incredible. So now I just kind of got lost in a sermon that I must be kind of mulling over or something. But it's one of the biggest things that I learned, especially walking alongside people who were rejected by family or had to live on that edge of with family that they truly loved, but who did not truly accept all of them. And to watch that bravery is a gift.
So let's switch gears a little bit. And I just, I think people's perception of maybe what a church or a religious institution is supposed to be is you come in and you adopt their principles and their code of conduct and things like that. And so we usually assume most congregations are going to pretty well have the same code or the same principles. But what's troubling to us is right now there is a bill at the Oklahoma State House that would protect conversion therapy, which is the practice of trying to use counseling and therapy practices to change somebody's sexual orientation or to convince them that their gender identity has to align with what they were assigned at birth, though they may have certainly different emotions, feelings, and identities apart from that. So this conversion therapy, the rest of the country, right now 23 states have banned conversion therapy, consider it harmful and dangerous. Yet Oklahoma is going the opposite direction. They've introduced a bill that would protect people who claim they can change somebody's sexual orientation or can, fix trans people. And so just want to know what your response would be to that as a religious leader, as a spiritual advisor.
Well, I think it's abhorrent. And it's torture. Having one person in particular that I know experienced that kind of therapy, and the harm that it did on that person's ability to even trust themselves. It is disgusting. And so I have to, so one of the best things and I say it all the time, that I learned when I became a parent is that children laugh as a mechanism to relieve discomfort that they feel. Like it's a brain response to relieve the intensity of whatever's happening. And so I just felt myself kind of like, it's laughable that, and I have to do it that way so that I can release the intensity of feelings of why someone needs to control a ghost figure that they don't know, like a person they don't know, and they want to ensure that that person can be bludgeoned emotionally, spiritually, and frankly, probably physically by conversion therapies. It's mind-boggling. And it's outside the realm of what real professional counselors and therapists are committed to doing. And so if the best practices of the professionals who do this work disclaim it, then why are legislators who are not mental health care professionals needing to legislate? It's really just about control. And their desire to not have anyone else's life be different than theirs. They want control in a way that's sick.
That's those are very powerful words. Would you have any advice for, you were the minister for a congregation. Would you have any advice for other congregations or spiritual advisors, perhaps who are wanting to start the journey towards being an inclusive, open, and welcoming congregation? Denominations all over the world are debating these issues, and some folks are just getting started, and some folks are actively resisting any kind of awareness. But any recommendations to, let's say, just to a congregation and their spiritual advisor?
Well, for instance, there are, like every church in town says they welcome everyone. And the kind of intentional discernment or study or prayerfulness to become open and affirming or reconciling or whatever the label is that group claims. People say, well, if they know us, we've got people in leadership and we've got this, we've got that. And it is vital. I mean, particularly when we see that there are bills like this coming out. Coming out's not the right. But when there are still bills being filed and making it through committee, and even, I don't know how far along that bill has made it, but then the time for just being on the edges of the conversation have gone away completely. Like, we have to take a stand and we have to be clear, and we have to equip people as Christians to have the skills to be clear about what they value. If you want to be a welcoming community, then it's not just putting out donuts and coffee. It is doing the spiritual hard work of wrestling with scriptures like that has been put forth in the questions, and demanding that we stand up for what's loving, and so do something. Like, I'm pretty aggressive about this, and there's ministers that I deeply love that are like, oh, but we have this and this and this, and I'm like, no, not good enough.
Very good. Do you have any words that you might share with, say you have a family that comes to you and they have an LGBTQ family member? Do you have words that you would maybe want to share with them?
I would say that we are knit together by God. We are created in the image of God. And that means that we, as humans, individually express the full creative reality of God. Meaning, if we were all the same, if we all looked the same and sounded the same, and we would not reflect God. We would not reflect the holy. And so when someone is brave enough to trust us with who they are, the very first thing we need to do is be grateful, whether we understand it spiritually or theologically or in light of scripture. If someone brings to us who they are, our first response should be, thank you for trusting me. And then we can start to process the heavy work of making sense of decades of, or hundreds of books, or whatever the studies have brought, whatever the society has taught us, the micro society of a congregation or our overarching society that one might be a part of. But it's a gift for someone to come and tell us something that might risk relationship, and that's my first response.
Very good. That was beautiful. And I think that's that important step there. You said, let them know that thank you so much for trusting me with your most private and personal thought, because I mean, lots of times we really are testing people out to see what their reaction is, and whatever your reaction is, it may drive us back in the closet or cause us to self-harm or cause us to really go through continued pain in our life if we've trusted you enough to come to you and then the response is not positive.
Right.
That's very good. Is there anything else you'd want to share with us tonight as we head towards closing out tonight? Because you've done a great job, by the way. So I love your ability to respond to different thoughts tonight that have been thrown in your direction.
Well, anytime there are people gathered, the churches like to say where 2 or 3 are gathered, Christ is there. When we are gathered with creation, sometimes it's people embodied, sometimes it's from a distance. When we are gathered, today I saw 7 cardinals around my bird feeder, and I felt gathered with the holy. It was marvelous. Whenever we gather, we provide one another a moment of being able to share and be seen. And I'm grateful for the moment to be seen and to share with all of you.
Thank you, Kelli. And please tell your family, your beautiful family, we said hello. And you told us earlier that y'all been getting in some premium snow sledding, as it should be. And sounds like you've been watching the Cardinals and they've been snow sledding. So
yes,
sounds like sounds like you're making the most of winter in the heartland. Well, you have been joining us for Spirit, our weekly dialogue about faith and sexuality. And next week's special guest, our special guest chaplain, will be Reverend Carmen White Yannick, who is the chaplain for the Tulsa Safety Center and is with Tulsa Metropolitan Ministries. And she will be our special guest next week, and look forward to her and the conversations we have regarding our spiritual advisors and sexuality and faith. Thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you so much. This is recorded. It will be on Oklahomans for Equality's Facebook page we usually keep it up till the next week, and then it's archived on our Oklahomans for Equality YouTube channel. So we keep it there, and you can follow this up and hear Reverend is it Driscoll Cruz, Reverend Driscoll Cruz. You can hear her interpret on the fly. That was nice. I was glad to see you do good work. All right. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Bye.